Hello, my name is Jari Kempers. I'm a health economist and consultant. Today I'm going to present you the results of an economic analysis of generic substitution of antihypertensive medicines in Moldova. This policy brief is available in English and Romanian, and you can find the download links below this video. Generic substitution is a key cost-containment strategy used in most of the countries in Europe. However, Moldova does not have an effective generic substitution policy in place yet. The substitution model that we are going to analyze is mandatory substitution of original antihypertensive drugs with the lowest priced generic drug with the same chemical entity and dose. The objectives of this policy brief are to open policy discussion with this practical example, to assess potential cost savings of a mandatory substitution model of antihypertension drugs to the National Health Insurance Company, CNAM, and to evaluate the impacts on patients' co-payments as well, and to make some policy recommendations. The related challenges to CNAM are firstly that the rise in drug reimbursement costs in general pose challenges to the financing of the healthcare system. Secondly, cardiovascular drugs accounted for 42% of all drug reimbursements of CNAM in 2018. The majority of the drugs in this group are used for hypertension treatment. Thirdly, hypertension requires long-term treatment and is therefore driving up the long-term reimbursement costs. Without cost containment measures, these reimbursement costs are likely to continue to grow in the future. With INN prescribing, we mean the prescription of drugs by their international non-proprietary names instead of their brand names. In Moldova, INN prescription is already being used. It is mandatory for physicians to use the INN prescriptions for all reimbursed drugs. Pharmacists are obligated to inform patients about lower cost drugs in the same INN class, starting at the lowest price. However, there is no obligation to sell a lower price drug, and consequently the current policy is not an effective cost-containment strategy. In this figure, the green bars show the reimbursement portions of each antihypertensive drug class reimbursed by CNAM in 2018. Then we compare these with the shares of drugs sold in pharmacies, the red bars. Interestingly, the portions are quite different. Most likely this is caused by patients buying antihypertensive medicines without prescriptions. From a public health point of view, this kind of widespread self-medication without regular monitoring is not desirable. According to the Medicines and Medical Devices Agency, there are 206 antihypertensive drugs registered in Moldova. 190 of these are generic drugs, 2 are original drugs without generic substitution available, and 14 are original drugs with generic substitution available. At the same time, these 14 drugs account for 30% of the pharmacy sales. If all these 14 drugs are substituted with the lowest price generic drug, the potential annual cost savings are significant 24%. For CNAM, this means major cost savings of 34 million lei, which is 17% of the total antihypertensive drug reimbursements in 2018. And importantly, this continues to generate cost savings in the following years. If all these 14 original drugs are substituted with the lowest priced generic drug, patients' co-payments for these drugs are reduced to 0. Depending on the drug and dose, the average co-payment reductions are 495 lei per patient year, which represents significant cost savings, especially for the poorest patients. The current policy mandating pharmacists to inform patients about the lowest price drugs does not work. There has to be an obligation to sell cheaper or the cheapest drug. It is essential that the generic substitution policy is combined with other pillars of good pharmaceutical practices. First of all, Credible and transparent drug quality controls need to be in place. The availability of safe and effective drugs is the foundation and a precondition for the successful implementation of this policy. Medical professionals, patients, and the general public needs to be educated about the quality of the generic medicines, and the relationships between physicians and pharmaceutical industry need to be regulated. Here are 5 recommendations arising from this study. Firstly, start policy dialogue on the mandatory generic substitution of drugs, and consider different substitution policies and vary their severity. Second, the substitution policy must obligate the pharmacist to sell lower priced drugs. Voluntary schemes or just informing patients do not work. Third, invest in technical and human resource capacities needed for the supervision and monitoring of the compliance with the substitution policy. The information system of CNAM needs to be able to process and generate drug-specific information. Fourth, invest in credible and transparent drug quality controls, which are the foundation and precondition for the successful implementation of the policy. And when done, educate medical professionals, patients, and the general public about the improved drug quality control measures, and also on the importance of the substitution policy. Fifth, allow physicians to exclude the generic substitution for clinical reasons. This must be always done in written, and their prescription practices need to be monitored. In conclusion, mandatory generic substitution of antihypertensive medicines would create major cost savings for CNAM and reduce patient co-payments as well. However, improved and credible drug quality control measures are a precondition for the successful implementation of the policy. Here are persons who I would like to thank for their support for this project. I hope that this example stimulates and opens policy discussion on the generic substitution in Moldova. If you have questions or comments, here are my contact details. You can find the download links to the policy brief below this video. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you soon.